everybody, and welcome to another episode of Office Hours. I'm Adam Coble, and we're going to answer some questions about game mastering because that's what Office Hours is all about. So if you are sitting there thinking, man, I wish that Adam Coble, famed internet dungeon master et al., would sit down and answer questions from their fans, you were in the right place because that's what this is. You did it. You have arrived, and it is time for that thing. You're going to get what you always wanted. Your dreams are coming true today. Today's questions are from the audience, as the usual ones. We're going to do 3 different questions. Ollie, Thomas, and Wasp Floss. One of these things is not like the others. They are giving me their questions today, and I'm going to answer them. If you have questions of your own, if you get to the end of this episode and you're like, you know what? I have some questions I need answering. You can submit them at www.adam-coble.com, and you can record your voice, or you can just type in your question and have somebody else record your voice. You can record nothing, and I'll read the question for you. But I feel like sometimes having you record your voice for me and for the audience, really, it's a treat. Like today, for example.
Hi, Adam. I'm back at it again with another question, and this one's about character flux. When a player, session to session, changes character, retires, rejoins, retires again, and is unable to settle into any particular one. This has happened to one of my players, and I've seen it happen before in other campaigns. Typically happens when people join mid-campaign, there's nothing to peg them down in the world, and they're flying by the seat of their few lines of backstory with whatever hook that I've tried to catch them with. And so, I come to you, Mr. Adam, hat in hand. Should I just be crafting better hooks for them? Are some players just happy to live in that flux forever? I know there's the classic talk to your players answer, but I was just wondering if you had any special insight into why this happens, what's to be done, and what should I go into that lovely DM to play a chat with? Thank you very much.
First of all, Ollie, how dare you? How dare you with that voice? How dare you do this to us? I wasn't paying any attention to anything Ollie was saying. I was just swimming in the deep ocean of your voice. No, so Ollie has done what I wish that every person would do, and has summarized the question. Look at this concise summary, so that once we get a chance to listen, we can refer to this short. So thank you, Ollie, for asking your question. Welcome back, Ollie. This is the second time that we've answered a question from Ollie, and I think it's a great one. I really like it because it addresses something that I think very few games and very few groups really focus on. Right? The idea here, the question isn't, how do I do a better job of running the game that I'm playing, or how do I manage a social thing? It kind of straddles the line between both, because it can be something that comes up as the result of the game itself, right? It can be, our game is very lethal and we have characters who are dying a lot and being replaced by new characters. We have this situation in which there is a grind, right? The characters enter the game and they leave the game, and that happens quickly, right? So that could be the thing. It could also be, as Ollie says, the social aspect of it, in which a player joins the game anew as the game is midway through, and they have a hard time hooking onto anything and want to experiment. I think that in my experience with role-playing games, so the kinds of games that I have been exposed to, there are very few games that allow us the freedom to try out different characters. This is something, and I'm gonna digress slightly, but this is something that I really, really love about Wizards of the Coast's kind of organized play structure, the Adventurers League. So the Adventurers League, it's designed to allow people to drop in and drop out kind of as they like, right? So you can go to a store, you can go to a convention, whatever, and you can bring a character you've already played, or you can make a new character. You can play that character in one session or one adventure. You can leave. You can keep that character and then you can return and play another game or play in a different game. Any game that is connected to the Adventurers League, you are allowed, as long as you adhere to the rules of the Adventurers League character creation, you're allowed to play. But the thing that I think is interesting is that those characters up to level 5 can, with no prompting other than your own interest, can change. So you might bring your character to one session. You might play them, say they're a human fighter. You might play them and you might say, you know what? This character is kind of boring as a human. I'm going to try making this character as a half-orc, or I'm going to make this character a tiefling. So the next time you come, it's the same character, right? You're still playing Krungus the fighter, but Krungus has just become a tiefling, right? Now, Krungus the tiefling fighter, it's the same character, and we treat it as if the canon has just continued on, right? Nothing is any different. Even if you're playing with the same group, the assumption is that Krungus was just simply always a tiefling, right? And then maybe the next session, you're like, well, you know what? Maybe it's the fighter part I don't like. And you're level 3, so you're still under that threshold. So Krungus goes from being a lawful good tiefling fighter to a chaotic neutral tiefling druid, right? The idea here is that the game recognizes that locking yourself into a specific choice with a character is something that can take some time to feel comfortable. If the game demanded that you abandoned all of your work, right? The point here is you could theoretically make Krungus, Chungus, and Grungus and have them all be 3 different characters, but they would lose the experience, they would lose the magic items, they would lose the gameplay points or whatever that Krungus had accumulated in those first 2 sessions. So it allows us to look at Krungus from a bunch of different angles to say Krungus is a fluid entity that we don't have to decide on yet. And I think that is absolutely magical. And the way that it does it in the Adventurers League is it just throws away verisimilitude. I have a personal deep-seated love for anything that will flip the bird to the idea of immersion. The idea that we are immersing ourselves in the world, that verisimilitude is the only thing that matters. Forget all that. We don't need that. We need games that play well. We need games that are a good experience for the people who are playing. So, to come back to Ollie's question, right? How do we support players who are bouncing between character concepts and classes? My first solution to this is just let them. Forget immersion. Forget for a moment. Forget about making the world feel real, and forget about the fact that yesterday Krungus was a fighter and now today Krungus is a cleric, and just treat these characters as they are in the moment, right? Say to a player, you know what? You can play whatever class you want. You can play whatever race you want, whatever alignment, whatever this game uses to structure characters. And for the first 3 levels, for the first 5 levels, for the first however many sessions, you can just change them as you need. And we're all just going to be okay with that. Because I don't want you to get stuck playing a character type that is boring for you. And I don't want you to sunk cost fallacy your way into never being able to make a change, right? Because that's what makes people want to stick with characters they don't like. And I know, Ollie, that's not the problem you're having. You're having a problem with people falling desperately in love with a character and then throwing them away and getting a new character and falling desperately in love with them and then throwing them away and whatever. So I would suggest taking the Adventurers League approach to say, I know that maybe this game or this campaign or this group or whatever, maybe those things are putting you in a position where you don't know what to play, right? This is me with a game like Pathfinder. This is me with a game like Dark Souls, right? You can sometimes only learn by doing. Sometimes you don't know what your favorite class is until you've played it for 10 sessions or 5 sessions. Sometimes you think that you bought the best spell in the game, and then someone will be like, no, actually, sorry, that spell is terrible, right? And you don't want to have people get stuck. So how you can better support them is give them room to make changes. I often say for new players, here's a very specific trick that I use. I often say with new players, if you have an ability that we've never seen on screen, right? If you've never rolled a certain skill, if you've never cast a certain spell, and later down the line, 1 session, 10 sessions, 1,000 sessions, it doesn't matter. And we've never seen it on screen and you want to change it, throw it out, right? Yeah, and in chat, Dave has pointed out with languages, it's hard to know at the beginning of a campaign which 6 languages are going to be the ones that matter. Let your players leave space on their character sheet. If you know that you need to have 4 skills that get your proficiency bonus, why assign them at character creation, right? Now, I'll do this very aggressively early on, but I'll still allow it later in the campaign, right? A character shifting their class isn't usually the end of the end of the world, right? Like having a barbarian go from a berserker to a zealot, same character, same race, same person. That's fine, right? No big deal. They used to have some powers. They don't have powers anymore. You know, if superhero comics can get away with it, so can we, right? A fighter who undergoes a deep philosophical change and wants to give up being a fighter and become a cleric. What sounds like more fun? Forcing them to start multiclassing into level 1 cleric when they're already a level 10 fighter, or saying, you know what? Next time we have downtime, your character goes to a monastery, throws aside their weapons, and becomes a cleric, right? So there are ways to build this into the verisimilitude of the game. Even things like having a character change their race, have the character change, like any fundamental thing about them shouldn't be stuck, and we should be able to roll with that as players, right? So yes, I know, Ollie, that you said in your question, I know the answer is talk to your players, but we're trying to structure how you have that conversation. So make this something that you apply to your whole campaign, right? Have this conversation during session 0 and do your check-in conversations at the end of every arc and say, cool, does anybody want to change their character? Is anybody not feeling their class anymore? Because we can fall in love with the things, and this is a thing that we struggle, and I'm going to use D&D as the example again, but this is a thing we struggle with, where we love the character, but we may not love the mechanical things about them. Perhaps in Halcyon and hopeful days of yore, you made a character you really love. You made this cool elf, and your cool elf has like a panther companion, and you made them a beastmaster because the words beastmaster sounded cool to you. And, the game has shifted and become more difficult. And now your beloved Throndir is actually kind of a piece of shit mechanically. All of the other characters are more fun and interesting. And old Throndir here, while you love him deeply and desperately, and you would never give him up, you are now playing a shitty character, right? You are suffering. You're suffering from your love of Throndir. So I think it's reasonable to say we're going to learn things about the game as we play it. Now, some games do this better than others. Some characters are more static than others. You'll find that this problem tends to hit hardest in games where the characters are static, right? So a character like a Dungeons and Dragons character, like old Throndir here, there's not a lot of movement laterally. If you're a Burning Wheel character, or you're an Apocalypse World character, you have a lot of lateral movement available to you. You can change playbooks, you can pick up new skills, you can change your character's beliefs, you can angle for new traits. But a Dungeons and Dragons character has only one direction to go. That's up, right? A Dungeons and Dragons character can only escalate what they already are. It's very, very difficult for those characters to change deeply unless we set the premise in the game world. Now, there's some overlap here, right? For example, let's say your player comes to you and says, So hey, I know that for the first 15 sessions of the game, I've been referring to Throndir as a he, right? But I've been rethinking it, and I think that Throndir's gender identity is maybe they're more like gender neutral. I think that they don't really have a deep connection with being a masculine elf. So I'm gonna ask everybody, like, refer to Throndir as like they them. Okay, can we do that? And no one at the table would be like, hi, that's, I don't know. We should probably balance it because NBs are OP, and it's not really fair that you get to just like give up your masculinity and becoming an NB. Like that's not really, but if Throndir's player were to say, you know what, I don't think that Throndir really is a ranger anymore. I think Throndir, it fits my idea of Throndir better to be a fighter. Then the game like bucks that change, right? That game bucks that change. And I think that we need to look at the universe as a magical place. And it's completely reasonable for us to find ways to say, sure, let's find a way to change you into a fighter. Let's find a way to change. Let's show that character change in the universe and be flexible about the mechanisms, right? Find ways to make that possible for the players, right? I think giving us the ability to attach to a character is, for a lot of people, the appeal of a role-playing game. I know that when I play as a player, not as a game master, when I play games as a player, I get very attached to my characters. I was very attached to Dr. Grigori. I'm very attached to Cantor Haig. Like, I love figuring them out as I play, and that means having them change, but not having to lose them for the sake of that change. You don't ever want a player to be in a position where they love some things about their character, but not others, and they're forced to just suck it up, right? Now, it's tough because fighter and elf are mechanical objects, whereas a character's gender or the clothes they wear, or the color of their skin or the color of their eyes or the color of their hair, how tall they are, none of that stuff is reflected in the mechanisms of the game. So look at the things that your players care about changing and look at the stuff that the game cares about changing and recognize where the work has to happen, right? If the game does not care about it, you don't have to do anything except say yes and find a way to make it work in the game. If the game does care about it, look at ways to ease that change and to make that change not just mechanical, but fictional, right? That will allow your players to engage with their characters, maintain that ongoing love of those characters, and then let them change. So it might be that these players that Ollie has, right, that are bouncing between character concepts and classes, they're just trying to figure out the game. And if you'd like to create some verisimilitude, give them the ability to change their character's stuff. Now, if that's not what they want, if they literally just want to play a whole bunch of different character concepts or classes, then give them room, right? Like let them do that. Let them throw out their characters and play new ones. Understand that part of your ongoing campaign will be guest stars and work with your player, right? Work with your player that is doing that to say, okay, these three players, they are going to stay the same character the whole time. You are going to change out until you find something that you like, or you're just going to keep changing out for the rest of the game. And here are the rules for that. When you make a new character, this is the level you will start at based on the rest of the party. These are the kind of things we can expect. I'm going to work with you to bring you into the game. Your character basically is going to have one goal. And when you achieve that goal, or when you get to a point in the game where you don't want to play that character anymore, then this character will leave. But if you want to stay with them, go ahead, we'll make a new goal. But understand in advance that there is a structure there, because it can be very, very trying as a player, as a game master, to have a player say, cool, I know that we're on level 3 of the dungeon and that it'll be very difficult to get back to the beginning of the dungeon, but my character just leaves. And my new character just shows up, so make it work, right? You have a responsibility to create a campaign world that feels functional and good for you, not just your players. You're not just there to serve them. So you can say, hey, you can't just have a character jump in the middle of an arc. I need you to agree to play the character until there is a narrative moment at which they can leave, right? If they can't agree to that, if they're just like, no way, Ollie, you have to do whatever I say. I'm going to just come in and make a new character. I'm going to leave, whatever. And that's on you. Then probably the thing that player should be bouncing out of is your group, because that's rude and it's demanding and it sucks, right? You're a team. You're working together. So work with them to create a structure that will allow for the style of play that they want, that is also not disruptive to your fun or your players' fun. So give them that room. I've talked before about how I had a unstable gaming group for a while. We were playing DCC. I think I've talked about this. So in the campaign that we played, I had 12 players, but I only ever played with 6 to 8 at any given time. And players would come in for a week, they'd leave for a week. They'd be around for a month, they'd go away for a month. They would move. I had one player who moved away for 6 months, came back and picked up the same character and jumped right back in. And we knew from the beginning this was going to be the thing. So I just, as with the gonzo setting of the universe, I just said, okay, so time in this universe is unstable because of the meddling of a chronomancer who lives on the moon in his clockwork palace. And sometimes the chronomancer just meddles with reality for reasons unknown. So you will have people who were there yesterday who just vanish. And for the characters in this universe, that is totally and completely normal. It is completely normal for you to wake up one day and have a twin sister you never had, and then to wake up in 2 weeks and have her disappear again, right? Those kinds of changes are built in to the universe because of the chronomancer who lives on the moon and fucks with our reality, right? And that was a fun way to incorporate that into the game. Now, obviously, that's a very long-term kind of plan. I built the campaign around that, but you can find ways to do it too, right? You can find ways to bring in characters and have them leave, but demand of your players that they work with you on that, because again, and to counter so many years of bad GM advice, your job is not to make it so that the players all have fun. It's everyone's job to work together to have fun. So just ask them, right? Ask them all right, I want you to have the freedom to play whatever kind of character you want. Do you want to have a character that is fluid, who can change classes and races as you go, right? How do we work that in, right? How do we make that part of the universe? Or do you want to have a bunch of different characters that you try out for an arc? And how long do you want to play them? Let's work together to make that possible. Let's have checkpoints where you can leave or change your characters, and then apply that to everybody. Now, there are games that'll do this just as a kind of final point. There are games that do troop style play. I'm thinking of Circle of Hands or Ars Magica. There are games where you rotate roles like Night Witches, right? Maybe try looking at how those games work and when you do those shifts in who is playing whom. And look to those for advice. Because again, I like to encourage people always to go to the game. Go to the game you're playing, look for something there. If the game has mechanisms, great, use those. If it doesn't, then it's going to be on you and your group, and you can start to hack in or get inspiration from other things. So take a look at those games. Look at some troop play games. Yeah, look at Paranoia. That's a great example from chat. And see what other games might have to offer you. And then steal those things. Just pillage them so hard.
Hi Adam. I started GMing only a while ago and wanted to play a Harry Potter style game with my group, with houses and everything. My problem is that I'm having trouble thinking up mysteries or antagonists, since the characters are all confined in this small space of the school. The bad guys can't really be killed since they're pupils too, so the bully whose frog you froze will be sitting next to you in potions for the next year planning stuff. The grown-ups are all more powerful and experienced than a bunch of first years, so it seems they too don't fit. And the classic defeat the big bad evil guy just doesn't seem to work in this restricted area. Since one of the suggestions for Season 2 of Far Verona was a magic school, I would love to hear what you had planned for this, and how you would go about building adventures in a world that's as big as a castle, with some forest and a lake surrounding it.
Thank you. And I actually think this question is from Thomas, not from David. It's from Thomas. Or any other English name. William. Billiards. So anyway, David Thomas, Thomas Davids. There's some questions here inside of this question, right? Like this isn't just about the like playing a Harry Potter game, right? Now it seems like it is, in the sense that, you know, we want to do a game about wizards and kids, and there's a constrained environment, and there are some things that Harry Potter's fiction is bringing to the table, but none of that stuff that is Harry Potter, none of the like literal chosen one wizard, Voldemort bullshit, none of that is going to be part of your game, because you're not trying to make Harry Potter fan fiction, or if you are, I don't know. I don't know what to tell you, because that's a whole other thing. That's not really what role-playing games are about. So the question here is, you want to play a game set in a constrained environment, right? As you said, the world is as big as a castle with some forest and a lake. Constrained environment, right? You want to play young people, right? You want to play inexperienced humans who are growing up as part of their narrative. You want there to be mysteries and antagonism within this school. But you're struggling a little bit because it's not very conducive to what we imagine role-playing games to be. Let me talk about the telling part of this question, the thing that I thought was the most interesting bit about the question, okay? So the bad guys can't really be killed since they're pupils too. So the bully whose frog you froze will be sitting next to you in potions for the next year planning stuff. I mean, the bad guys can't really be killed because that's just not how normal, sane people work. Right? Like, if Harry Potter were written like a role-playing game, in the first book, Harry would have stabbed Draco Malfoy in the eye with a knife, right? Harry would have been like, all right, that's it. Stab, 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 stab. Right, solve that problem. Who's next? Right? Like, the characters in a role-playing game, the characters in a role-playing game are not like the characters in Harry Potter, because there is this different thing. So what you need is to deviate pretty far. You need to deviate pretty far from what role-playing games are telling you to do. So I guess what's interesting is, if you are trying to GM a Harry Potter style game, but you are using, I don't know, Dungeons and Dragons, you're fucked. You're just straight up fucked, because D&D wants Harry to murder Draco, right? D&D is going to give Harry a box of knives with which to stab Draco and take his wand and sell it down in Diagon Alley, right? And so you need to find a game that's going to reward the kind of game that you want to play, right? This goes back to game assessment. It goes back to understanding, what is this game about? How is it about that? What are we rewarded for? Find a game that wants to play notes that are concordant, that are in harmony with the song you are trying to sing at the table, right? So I don't know that I have a great example that you can just jump into in terms of games. I know that there are some games that do Harry Potter adjacent stuff, right? I think you could use Fate Accelerated to do a Harry Potter game. I think you could use Cortex Plus, right? That does like TV show style games. Do some research out there into what games already support this style, because God knows, people, you're not alone, David Thomas Billiards. We know that there are games out there that want to tell things, but remember, and this is where we start getting into the like deep-seated fuckery of how role-playing games are sold to people. Remember, just because a game has a picture of some people playing copyright-free, legally distinct from Quidditch on the cover, does not mean that the mechanisms of the game are going to be any good for the kind of Harry Potter story you want to tell. right? So think about more than just what Harry Potter does. Think about what kinds of stories, and this goes back to what we were talking about before. Is this a story about fighting the big bad, right? Is this about putting aside your house or class differences, right? Because Harry Potter is a story about class in a lot of ways. Is it about putting aside those things to fight a greater evil? Is it about how the upper class and the lower class can come together when they have to fight Magic Satan? Is that what your game is about? Or is Voldemort just background noise and your real game is about which house is going to win the Crumpet Cup, right? Is that what it's about? Or is your game Voldemort's in the foreground, right? The very, very far distant background, and then the house stuff is in the midground, but what's really going on is teenage drama, right? Is it like a CW X-Men show? So what do you actually want when you say, I want a Harry Potter style game? You really have to boil that down, because everything is more than one thing, right? Star Wars isn't one thing. Star Trek isn't one thing. The Witcher isn't one thing. Harry Potter's not one thing. They're a bunch of different things. So you got to figure out what stuff is getting you hype about Harry Potter, and then finding a game that you can attach it to. So like, for example, when people ask me about, hey, Adam, what's your favorite superhero game? I say, well, what kind of superhero story are you trying to tell, right? Are we telling a story about characters that are like Greek gods, where they're human and they have all these human flaws, but they're bigger and more powerful than any human could be? And so it's about like a responsibility to your power, right? Are we telling a story about people with no powers, right? Who are trying to survive in a world where things are turned on their head and we have to deal with like larger than life situations, right? Is this more of like a powers thing, right? Or is the superhero stuff a metaphor for being marginalized in some way? And really this is about trying to grow up as a person trying to get a hold of their identity in a world that distrusts them, right? Are we playing Mutants in the Night? Are we playing Masks? Are we playing Champions? Are we playing Aberrant? Are we playing like what stories are we trying to tell? We're not trying to tell a superhero story, because superhero stories are nothing. They're a set of aesthetic indicators. They're not themes necessarily. They can certainly carry those themes, but they don't encompass them en masse, right? Entirely. So think a little bit about what you want out of a Harry Potter style game, and then find a game that you can use wholesale or reskin, but that fits those themes. Don't go looking for a game that just claims to be a Harry Potter game, because I bet you anything, if you find a Harry Potter game, I bet you it's going to suck. A game that puts itself out there as the ultimate Harry Potter simulator is trying to cover too much ground, unless it has sub-mechanisms for each style of Harry Potter play, right? Are you trying to focus on Harry Potter style A, B, or C? And Harry Potter as a work of extended fiction is not the same at the end as it is at the beginning. What era of which Harry do you want to be? The only Harry I want to be is the big dude. I want to be Hagrid. He's the Harry I want to be. So I don't know. People in chat have made some suggestions. I'm sure, and I hope that in the comments, people will leave some suggestions about games and what they cover vis-a-vis Harry Potter. But let's talk a little bit about the specific bits and pieces here, right? So like, having trouble coming up with mysteries or antagonists since the characters are all confined in the small space of the school. You basically get, in a situation like this, you basically get two kinds of antagonists. You get shitty equals and then outsiders, right? Most Harry Potter books have Harry dealing with both things, right? He's dealing with, let's say Draco is an internal villain. We'll talk about the early Harry Potter stuff. And I am no Harry Potter universe scholar, right? I have never done a sorting hat quiz. I don't much care for Harry Potter as a thing, but the themes of Harry Potter have some crossover with some of the stuff that I like. I would be a bad player for this game because I would just want to be like the magical Marxist that overthrows the system of oppression in which all muggles and wizards live. But I can understand some of the themes. So pardon me if I make some missteps in terms of the great Harry Potter lore, right? Okay, so Harry Potter in the early bits is dealing with two different villains. He's dealing with Draco Malfoy, who is the internal villain, and he's dealing with the external villain, which is to say the threat of and inevitable arrival and whatever, the long-term villain of Voldemort, right? So you have two stories going at the same time. You've got the like, you're an outsider who's just arrived at school. You're trying to like figure out your place. It's you and your dorky friends, and you are trying to be the cool kids. And this is just the same story that we've had since time immemorial, right? This is Mean Girls. This is every teenage drama. This is 10 Things I Hate About You. This is like characters being teenagers who happen also to be able to cast spells. This is Buffy, right? So that's pretty easy. It's just like you have villains in the game that you can't really do anything about except try to make them look bad or be better than them at school. And each of the characters will have their own way to struggle against being picked on, right? Like Harry, his whole thing is that he's like the boring ass chosen one, and that he overcomes Draco just by being more and more Harry Potter as time goes on. Hermione is super fucking smart, and she uses that to excel academically and to be like a rad student, right? She's overcoming her own bad stuff there, which Draco picks on her for. And I don't know what Ron is. Ron, he just wears his Ron shirt and tries to survive, right? He's the goof. So I think that's pretty easy. You just have yourself a situation where you have a character who is positioned above them. They all want the same thing, right? Like Draco wants to be Harry, right? Draco wants to be a successful wizard who is popular and everybody loves and respects and thinks is cool, right? And he's got his own struggles to deal with and whatever. And this can be PvP or it can be PvE, right? This can be an NPC. Draco can be an NPC or a PC in your game. You can let this, with the right group, you can let the internal villain be rivalry within that group, right? So give the characters their own identity, give them their own struggles. Ask the players to have things that make their teenage life hard, and don't make it all like, I'm the chosen wizard. That's the most boring, right? Like, let one player be a secret werewolf if they really want to, but what you really need to do is just make the characters as normal as possible, because, and I learned this lesson from inspectors. The magic stuff is only cool when it's contrasted against how normal the people are. So that's your internal stuff. That's your internal threat. It can be ongoing. It can be PvP. It can be PvE, whatever. That will be ongoing. And honestly, that to me is the stuff that's the most interesting. Your external threat is the thing that will thread your seasons together, so that if Draco is an enemy in season 1 and he's an ally in season 4, the reason for that is the ongoing struggle against an outside thing. So this isn't about like murder fucking your way up the chain until you defeat the last boss, Appledore Dumblefart, right? It's not about that. It's not about being a D&D character where you're like, all right, I'm class 1, and now I have to kill all the class 2s, then I have to kill all the class 3s, and finally I will ascend my way up into the Phoenix Throne, and I will murder Appledum, and we will win Harry Potter. That's not how that works. So you don't have to worry about it that way. It's not about being like the grown-ups being all powerful and experienced. They're not. Your antagonism has to exist outside of the traditional role-playing structure. So think about what you like about the world and make that interesting. And I think that to answer your question, at the end of the whole thing, right, about constrained environment, every game is set in a constrained environment. It just depends on how much you squint, right, when you look at the map. So The Forgotten Realms, it's real big, right? But most Forgotten Realms campaigns, most of them don't have hyperfocal detail on every single object, right? A game that is set exclusively in Waterdeep isn't just a game set in Waterdeep, it's a game set in the various neighborhoods of Waterdeep. It's a game set in the various buildings within those neighborhoods. You get a deeper, more granular understanding of Waterdeep if your game is set there than you would if your game was set in the Forgotten Realms, where you visit Waterdeep and then leave, right? The game is set in Baldur's Gate, Waterdeep, Neverwinter, Calamshan, etc., 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 right? So instead of having big, broad, far-apart things, you've got an entire castle and a dungeon under the castle. You've got a forest. Maybe you've got some hills. Maybe there's a cave. You've got a lake. You've got under the lake. You've got all kinds of exciting stuff in the same way you would if you had a whole world. So you just need to pick interesting locations they're in and make them as interesting as you might a town or a city in a campaign that is pulled back further, right? Zooming in on a setting isn't actually any different. It's just about how much you focus on any given thing. So make the wings of the castle different, right? Give the forest, the outskirts, the deep woods, the fairy glade, like give them secondary locations within it, right? Make each place unique and different. And since it's a wizard school, make it really different, right? Like the House Snakerby wing is going to be very different than the House Dovetail wing, right? And if you go down into the wing where the Horfleporfs are, that's going to be really different too. And it's going to reflect the themes and tone of the things that you are trying to express through your game. So figure out what you care about as far as Harry Potter goes. Throw away all of the D&D baggage that you've got. It's not about fighting your way to Appledore, right? And then find a game that will match that stuff. And then play it, right? And then play that game, which is like kind of a lot, but this is all session 0 stuff, right? Or pre-session 0 stuff. You can lead yourself up to that without too much trouble, I think. Good luck though. Good luck. And if chat, if you have or YouTube commenters, if you have a game that does Harry Potter well and in a focused way, do it. Just put it in the, let me know. Let me know what it is. Yeah. All right. So our last question comes from Wasp Floss, and this one.
Hi, Adam.
Hello?
Both my players and I enjoy sharing and building morally complex worlds together. We also like monsters. Some of us like adopting or even smooching monsters, while others just like the sweet, sweet XP they give when they're crushed by our battle hammers. Do you have any advice on creating and portraying interesting and sympathetic monsters, especially outside of just trying to humanize them? Cheers.
So like, if this question had just been like, we like building morally complex worlds with monsters that we can interact with in a way that is more than just killing them, how do we do that? I think this would be one question. But you've got this group of mixed interest where they're like, we like monsters. Some of us like being friends with these monsters. Others like murdering them. How do we create and portray interesting and sympathetic monsters? So in a game in which monsters are there to be fought and defeated and murdered, adopting or even smooching monsters is the wrong thing to do. It is counter-ludographic, right? It is playing a pacifist in a war game. Right? So one side or the other in that situation will have to shift. unless you want to make social engagement in this game equal reward-wise, and not just reward-wise, but equal possible-wise, right? So, okay, there's two things that get in the way. Let me roll back a little bit. There's two things that get in the way here. I'm going to talk about Dungeons & Dragons because it's the lingua franca of the game, and that's how it goes. So Dungeons & Dragons gives you tools to murder things, and it gives you rewards for overcoming things with those murder tools, right? Dungeons & Dragons knows what it's about. If you try to reward players for not murdering them, never do this in a game. Do not reward people for not playing their characters. Don't reward people for not engaging the mechanisms of the game. Don't give people experience or whatever for not, because you're gonna get better at murdering by not murdering. It just doesn't make any goddamn sense. So we cannot just change the experience model. We can't say you get experience for diffusing combat situations, because most of the players will not have equipment for that, and most of them will not be able to do it very well. You get one shot at it. But let's go back even further, right? We're gonna talk a little bit about monsters. So what is a monster in a role-playing game? Right? What is a monster in a work of fantasy? If you asked Robert Howard, if you asked Conan, right? If you ask Lovecraft what a monster is, if you ask Gygax or Arneson, hey, what are monsters? Ask Mark Reinhagen what a monster is, right? I think that in role-playing games, what we think of as monsters are inhumans, right? Things that are not like us. And even in D&D, we've seen a shift, because it used to be there were humans and there were demi-humans, right? You were a human or you were a demi-human. Demi-humans are halflings and dwarves and elves and half-elves and gnomes and anything a PC could be. But they weren't humans. They were less than humans, right? They were non-humans. They were subhumans, right? So, okay, they're not monsters, right? They're not monsters because players can portray them. So then everything else in the game is a monster. There's a whole manual of them, right? The monster manual is full of things that we engage in a conflict situation with and we defeat, and then we've won. That's the game, right? Those are monsters. Is a mind flayer a monster? Probably. Is a dragon a monster? Yes. But then what about a lizard man? Is a lizard man a monster? Is a person, a human being, or an elf or a halfling with bad desires, are they a monster? I think the real distinction between what is or isn't a monster is it us or is it something else? I think that's the real dividing line, right? The PCs, whatever they are, they're not monsters. Everything else is a monster. This is the approach that Dungeon World takes. You are a player character if you're playing that game. Everything else is a monster. But monster in this case is used to say a thing we are allowed to do whatever we want to, right? That there will be no consequence for. If you really wanted to be on the nose about it, you could write a role-playing game where the chapter about PCs is called Us and the chapter about the things they're going to kill is called Them. So in that case, a human with different religious beliefs than you, they're a monster because you're going to disagree, you could kill them, and you're going to get experience. The game might reward you for that fight. So That's the trick, right? How do we create and portray interesting or sympathetic monsters, especially outside just trying to humanize them? I think when we say humanizing monsters, what we mean is giving them believable, understandable human traits, making them more like us. Humanizing or anthropomorphizing monsters, though those two things are different, humanizing a monster means giving it human-like traits that we can then be like, oh, it's like us. We should probably not kill it because it's more like us, instead of saying it's nothing like us, but we respect and acknowledge its personhood anyway, right? Like, that's the harder trick. If you say, and this, you see this in adventures all the time, where you're like, you go to kill the kobold, and the kobold suddenly squeaks out in common, no, I have a wife and children. And you're like, oh, I also have a wife and children, or could if I wasn't such a horrific murder beast. Humans have wife and children. We cannot kill this kobold. It is like us. Instead of simply being like, no, don't kill me. Killing is wrong. It's like, well, yeah, fuck you, kobold. Stab, right? You don't get to have that moral or ethical stance. You're not allowed to make that decision because you're a monster, right? We humanize our enemies because the opposite, right, demonizing them, making them into monsters, is how we desensitize people against things like killing, right? Where we have to reduce thinking entities to thinking, breathing, family-having entities to monsters so that we can kill them without thinking like, oh God, I'm like them. I have done unto the other as I would do unto myself, right? Like we are the same, right? And can you, as an elven fighter, can Throndir look at a hideous illithid and say, no, we're not so different, you and I, my purple tentacled faced friend? Right? Can Throndir do that? Now, the game that Throndir is a part of is encouraging Throndir not to ask that question, right? It is encouraging Throndir to kill first and ask questions later because Throndir holds in his hands a +1 bow of illithid killing, right? He is wearing armor to protect him against the other that is trying to murder him, right? All of his tools, he has been raised, verily created to destroy the other, things that are not like him, to defeat monsters, right? If Throndir puts the bow down, the game will punish Throndir, right? The version of Throndir that chooses not to fight is literally a failed version of Throndir. So we get into this thing, and kind of where I'm going with this is we get into this thing where the players might want something, right? The players might want something from the game. They might enjoy adopting and smooching monsters. They might want to engage monsters in that way. And that's great. The GM might agree. The GM might think, I want to portray a world in which all sentient creatures have agency, in which monsters could be people too, right? But the game is sitting there sharpening its knives. So I think that you can certainly play games that allow for a variation on this theme. You can play this thing where there is no us and them. We don't kill monsters because they are monsters. I'm not even saying that we have to play a game in which you can't crush your enemy and drive them before you, right? Like, I think that like violence and murderous violence is still totally possible in a game in which monsters are not the other, that everyone is together in the same pool. It's just that you have to have other reasons to kill them then. And the game needs to reward you for that, right? You need to be able to say, I am murdering my enemies because they oppose my plans. I am murdering my enemies because they are in my way. I am murdering my enemies because they are trying to murder me, right? It's not about we are this way and you are another way. And there are settings that do this, right? Ravnica does this. Planescape does this to a degree. Really, any cosmopolitan setting will do this. There is a World of Dungeons Planescape hack called the Planarch's Codex that does this. This idea that who you are doesn't mean you are better or worse than anyone else, right? It's not about humans, demi-humans, monsters. It's about all of us together, and we're fighting about other things. Because in these games, in Dungeons and Dragons, you do still need to have reasons to engage in conflict. They might be philosophical, they might be territorial, whatever. But portraying interesting and sympathetic monsters is only going to put people in the baby kobold situation, right? Where you say, no, don't kill me. I'm a kobold and I have a wife and 17 children. And then you're like, well, now what the fuck do we do? Right? You've put your players in a position where they're like, I guess we could rescue this kobold and we could save their family and we could adopt them and we could, give them jobs and we could do that. But the game we are playing is whispering, fucking kill them. Just kill the kobold. Get him. Kill him and his babies. So like conflict, right? Ludonarrative dissonance. You get trapped in this position where you're butting heads with the GM, positing moral questions, humanizing or otherwise. And I think that the GM, like, how do we convince people that their enemies or their perceived enemies are also people, right? The game has an agenda and it is pushing that agenda very, very hard. So if you want to see monsters as people, you need to play a game in which there is no differentiation between them and the players are rewarded for doing things that are engaging with the world around them, not just murdering them, but that might also have room for murdering your enemies. But you got to remember, if you want this to feel egalitarian, if you want this to feel not like a nasty othering mess, the killing has to be justified by other things. You cannot simply kill them because they are different from you. There has to be another reason for that violence. And then we can get into this whole deeper conversation about how maybe there's never justifiable reasons for violence and all of this other stuff. I think D&D does have a precedent for this, right? There was a time in which D&D, by way of its structures, made a statement about violence being bad. It gave you tools to commit violence. It gave you tools to survive violence. It gave you tools to enact an outcome in which you have defeated your enemies by way of violence, but that was considered a fail, right? It was considered a failure state in early D&D. If you got into a fight, you had fucked up. Either you rolled badly on the encounter table, you made a bad impression on some hobgoblins, but it used to be that when you met a character, sight unseen, right, a monster of any kind that was capable of understanding you, there was a table you would roll on, and there was a chance, based on how charismatic you are, there was a chance that monster would immediately become your friend. They would be like, oh, hey, like we can get along. Let's work together, right? And that was a thing that would happen in games. And it's certainly possible to adapt that mindset to D&D, but in early games of D&D, you were there for the money. And sometimes, most of the time, in fact, violence was from trying to get money. The monsters had the money, and you wanted the money, and the tools you had were setting you on a path where you could maybe murder them for their money, but you could also trick them for their money or whatever, but the money was the goal. You only got a pittance of experience for killing monsters, right? The murder was for a purpose, always. But in Dungeons and Dragons, in the modern version of the game, that goal is less clear. The reason that you might murder something has to come from other places. It has to come from the narrative, and that isn't always clear. So I guess the thing that I would go for here, Wasp Floss, the way that I would come at this would be portray intelligent creatures. Portray monstrous creatures as having their own internal existence. Give them agency. Do not make them simply simplified, two-dimensional, rampaging, whatever, because that'll just get them killed. But don't anthropomorphize them too much, right? Like I said, the true answer of that kobold's life is don't kill me because I deserve to live. Not don't kill me because I'm like you, right? You don't need to understand the alien to know that it's wrong to annihilate it. Right? Give them reasons to fight and make those fights matter. Don't make it just about sweet XP. Give them something that the players can attach to. Like every fight should matter. And so for me, one way that I've done this is in Court of Swords, players just don't get rewarded for fighting anymore unless it's a goal, right? And if it's a goal, I'm going to interrogate that. If a player writes a goal that says, I will kill 500 orcs, my question will be, why? Like, what is your actual goal? Like, why do you want to kill 500 orcs? Because that'll help us understand the character. It'll understand their own biases and where they come from. But fighting has to be for some other purpose, right? It's either a block between me and the goal, or I'm trying to survive, right? It's about motivation. It's about understanding why you do that thing, right? So understand the sort of intrinsic stuff, the reasons why violence is happening in the narrative, and then move towards that. That is a mechanical thing. Yeah. But remember, if you're playing Dungeons and Dragons, or you're playing Dungeon World, or you're playing Torchbearer, most of your tools are going to be leaning you into murdering, right? Is violence. Violence will be a natural part of the game, and that's okay. That can be part of the game. I would like it if you could get to a place where some of you could adopt or smooch monsters and others could kill monsters, but you all have reasons to do so, right? That it's not just I have a personal predilection for monster smooching and you want to play the game as it's built, because that's going to lead to player tension. I wouldn't want to be either of those players in a group where we weren't both being rewarded. Like if I'm the battle hammer in that analogy, right? If I am playing Throndir as a kill machine because I want all the XP, and somebody else in my group is just trying to kiss all the monsters, and we waste hours just debating whether or not I should be shooting the monsters, I'm going to get frustrated, and they're going to get frustrated. I'm going to point at the game and say, motherfucker, the game tells me to kill this monster. Why are you slowing me down? That's going to cause player tension, right? So talk about it as a group and understand that combat needs to be for a purpose, not for its own sake. And then communicate that as a group, because you may have a fundamental mismatch, right? Because both of those players' opinions are valid. And they're simultaneously valid too, because you can both want things that don't match up, and you're going to have to adjust the game, right? You're going to have to adjust the game one way or another if you want to portray interesting and sympathetic non-humans in a way that doesn't just other them and turn them into murder targets, because that's the game's default mode. Yeah. And that's our episode. That's episode number 83 of Office Hours. I had a lot to say in that one. That was fun. There was a lot there. So thank you for coming, everybody. You can submit your own questions at www.adam-koble.com. There's an Office Hours link. Just click it, fill out the form, submit your lovely voice, or if you don't feel comfortable doing that, it's okay. Just don't, and I'll read the question for you, or you can have someone else do it. Whatever, it's fine. And every time we do an episode, I answer 3 questions. Usually, sometimes we focus on one thing, but mostly I answer 3 questions about role-playing games, and I answer GMing and game design and social table level stuff, quandaries and queries from you. So thank you for coming and watching another episode. I've been Adam Koble, and you've been whoever you are, you beautiful humanoid. We will see you next time for more Office Hours. Thanks for coming, everybody.